a federal constitutional right to an abortion.
And the Supreme Court has overturned Roe v. Wade.
The moment America and women's rights went back in time.
It's going to be legal chaos.
We just learned that I got 30-day fines for disobeying the police.
Her alleged crime? Violating the country's strict dress code.
Women remain significantly underrepresented in leadership roles across policy and power structures. As such, women's leadership marginalization is in fact a significant threat to tackling the global issues of the 21st century. So the Johns Hopkins SAIS University provides a platform to serve the global community in this arena through the SAIS Women Lead initiative.
Women's leadership is crucial, and I think SAIS Women Lead is a wonderful vehicle, a wonderful community for tackling what it means to be a woman leader in the field.
I think SAIS has an enormously important role to play in shaping the global gender equality agenda. We know that women play an incredible role in dealing with issues like public health. And that research that we do here can help bring to broader awareness of the fact that how gender equality is not just a value in its own right, as a human right, but also something that has broad positive social implications.
When it comes to solving complex global problems, women have to be in the room. Whether it's economics, climate change, or public health, women are often the ones who are disproportionately affected by these issues. So it's critical that they're in the room to create long-lasting, sustainable solutions.
So in a time when there are global crises all around the world, I think it's really important for the leaders today to be acting not out of self-interest or out of corporate interest, but really out of a deep dedication to serving their community. And it's been proven time and time again that women leaders are especially good at coming to the negotiating table and serving their communities with those attributes.
I believe that authentic leadership means listening, learning, and being willing to challenge not only societal assumptions, but also our own internal assumptions to problem solve and lead effectively.
As a doctoral student focusing on the Africa region, I have gained an in-depth understanding of the continent and how to tackle the multifaceted challenges that affect women in areas such as economic development and conflict resolution.
With this new location, we aim to expand our programmatic, research-focused and convening impact through strategic partnerships. Good evening. Maybe let's try again. Good evening.
Good evening.
There we go. So I am honored and just thrilled to welcome you all to the Inaugural Women's International Leadership Summit by SAIS Women Lead, a global women's leadership development program. Again, we're delighted to have you here. I extend my heartfelt gratitude to each of you for joining us as we explore the pivotal role of authentic leadership in addressing the complex and interlocking challenges that our world faces. The world is at a critical juncture. We're witnessing the saddening reality of the heightening absence of understanding, empathy, and decrease in consensus around issues of importance across the globe. But one thing remains constant, uncontested, and perhaps incontestable, and that is the importance of effective leadership for global stability and sustainable growth. There is no substitute for leadership, however one slices it. As such, the theme of authentic leadership couldn't be more relevant today in a world characterized by complex and interconnected crises, from climate change and global health challenges to social inequality and geopolitical tensions. So, we are really glad that you're here with us to have this conversation. Again, a warm welcome to all of you. And now I am going to introduce our boss, the first speaker, the president of the Johns Hopkins University, President Ron Daniels. Ron Daniels is the 14th president of Johns Hopkins University, a position he has held since 2009. At Hopkins, he has strengthened interdisciplinary collaboration in research and education, enhanced student access, deepened engagement with the city of Baltimore, and supported economic and social innovation. A law and economics scholar, he is the co-author of 8 books and dozens of scholarly articles on the intersection of law, economics, development, and public policy. His most recent book, What Universities Owe Democracy, takes up the challenge facing democracy and argues for the indispensable role that universities play in sustaining democratic societies at this critical moment in history. And he's also the reason we're in this fabulous building. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to President Ron Daniels.
So you tried good evening, it was so-so. Let me see if maybe there was some question of the timing, so let's try this. Good afternoon. Buonasera. It is great to see you all, and Geeta, thank you for that very warm introduction. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here. I am thrilled to be here to play a modest role in helping you kick off this inaugural summit. But the truth is, as much as I want to welcome all of you and to thank you for participating in this and the terrific speakers that you've got lined up who have agreed to participate in the event, the truth is I'm here for one singular reason, and that is to thank you, Geeta, because here's the thing. We are here, of course, celebrating the inauguration of this magnificent facility, which we opened, of course, many of you will know, officially yesterday. And the idea behind this facility was first and foremost to deal with the deferred maintenance problems that Jim's predecessors on Massachusetts Avenue kept reminding me about. And we knew we had to solve that. But the truth is, it became an opportunity to think about SAIS, Washington, the university in a much broader frame. And the idea was that what we wanted to do and to create was a place that is truly the exemplar of what it means to be one university and to bring together multiple disciplines, multiple schools. Of course, we wanted a glorious, amazing home for SAIS, but we also wanted some company, and we wanted to bring the other parts of the university together. And indeed, we were even more ambitious than that. What we wanted to do was to bring not just intellectual and scholarly life, but to bring the creative arts, to bring the humanities, to bring culture to this place, and then have all of these disciplines or perspectives, intellectual and artistic, creative, all mingling together. But yet, there was another dimension to this. In the ideal dream, we would also have regular, repeated moments when you bring together all of these perspectives and join them with the world outside the university, where our commitment to impact, to engagement could be manifested very clearly. So my role was, to sort of help articulate the vision and to, of course, work with our fabulous benefactor, Mike Bloomberg, to support this vision. And then, of course, to translate all of these aspirational ideas into a building that hopefully would give play, concretization to this dream. And then you sort of hope, will someone actually do things that take on bits and pieces of this idea of all the different collisions, all the intersections that we want to realize. And here's where you come in. You did it all. Every one of the aspirations that we have articulated, dreamt about for this building, one day after the inauguration of this building, we have a moment, we have a program, we have an initiative that does all of the things I've said. And so to you, Geeta, I just say thank you, thank you. You do so much for the university and for SAIS. As Vice Dean in so many different roles. But in some sense, you created this pilot project which perfectly embodies, instantiates all of our loftiest aspirations. So This is terrific. To all of you, thank you for being here. I hope you have a wonderful program. And I'm sorry, after 3 days in Washington, I've got to get back to home base. But I wish you, again, all the best. And thank you for being part of this great celebration here at Johns Hopkins this week. Sincerely felt. Okay. Oh.
Yes.
Am I supposed to? Yes. I almost got it all right. Save for my great honor and responsibility, not perfectly discharged, to introduce our Dean of the School of Advanced International Studies, Jim Steinberg. He is the perfect leader for this perfect moment at Johns Hopkins. I couldn't think of a better person who combines the capacity to bring vision, intellectual rigor, a real sense of the possibilities for policy and for the ideas of SAIS and for the university. We're really lucky to have him. Jim, over to you. Goodbye.
Well, let me also thank President Daniels for being here for this very special event. And as he said, it really is very special that really the first event of this type that we've had since the formal dedication of this building should be this first inaugural Women's International Leadership Summit. It really is a notable occasion and an appropriate way to mark this new phase in the life of SAIS and of Johns Hopkins University. And it's especially appropriate because women have long played a very important part in the history of Johns Hopkins. Since the very first class graduated from SAIS in 1945, women have played a really critical role. Indeed, during the first decade of our years as a school, women were about a third of the student body. And in every decade from the beginning, they've distinguished themselves in their accomplishments and the contributions they've made to our country and to the world. There have been so many remarkable women who have gone on from SAIS to make such a big difference that it's almost churlish of me to mention a few names, but I will. And I want to pay tribute, for example, to Pam Flaherty, a longtime member of our board, who attended SAIS, graduated in '68, and ascended to a leadership role at Citibank at a time when women managers were quite scant in the banking industry, and ultimately she went on to the Citi Foundation. The remarkable service that our own Jill McGovern has played for so many years in making a difference to our community and to the world. The role that my amazing friend Gina Abercrombie Winstanley has played. Her 30-year career as a diplomat in the United States, where I had the privilege of serving side by side with her. Or Jody Williams, our 1984 graduate, who was a Nobel Prize winner for her work on the campaign against landmines. Just a few that you can name. And then, of course, in 2001, our very distinguished alumnus, Jessica Einhorn, became the first woman dean of SAIS, as I said, in 2001. So we have a long history of involvement with women's issues, but this particular initiative and the role of SAIS Women Lead, I think, really reflects the way SAIS operates and the commitment that we have to these issues. What was remarkable about this is that this initiative arose from our students. As so many things that happen here at SAIS. A really remarkable student in 2012, Sarah O'Rourke, was one of the leading forces who helped galvanize the interest in creating a program like this with the dual aim of empowering women leaders in the international sphere and addressing key issues facing women around the world. And we're privileged today to have two members of our board who played a critical role in working with her to help make this happen. Kathy Pike, who's going to be with us in one of the panels, and Sarah O'Hagan in the front row here. So this is something that really does reflect something that's in our DNA. And of course, it's now achieved a remarkable manifestation in our extraordinary Dean, Chito Nwankwo, who now takes on the leadership of this program and has taken it to this new level that we're seeing today with this wonderful International Leadership Summit. So through its interdisciplinary courses and practicum programs, the Global Women in Leadership organization here, along with the SAIS Women's Alumni Network, provides students and alumni with opportunities to develop their leadership skills and collaborate on action-oriented projects to advance women around the world. And it's a special honor for me to have the privilege to welcome and to have a conversation with Ambassador Geeta Gupta, who is the Ambassador at Large for Global Women's Issues at the State Department. I've been privileged to play a small role and certainly to be a witness for a long time in the role and the importance of this office from its creation as a position of special advisor to the Secretary in 1995 pursuant to congressional enactment, but a decision of then President Clinton to create this position as an advisor to the Secretary of State when I was the head of policy planning in the beginning of the first William Clinton administration, and then to come back in 2009 under President Obama and Secretary Hillary Clinton for the appointment of the first ambassador at large and the creation of this as a distinct office within the Secretary's office. And for those of you who know how State Department works, if you're an S/somebody, you're an important person. I was S/P in my days when I was head of planning, and of course Geeta is S/GWI. And the first incumbent, as I said, Milan Verveer, who's known to many of you, who is just a towering force in the field and a voice for women's issues everywhere, as well as her successor, Kathy Russell, a great friend and colleague of mine, who is now the executive director of UNICEF. So it shows you the important role that this has all played. And so, again, for me personally, it really is an honor to welcome her here. I want to give you a little bit of a brief biography. It could go on and would take up all the time of our conversation. But she is the fourth ambassador at large for global women's issues, and she's the first woman of color to hold this position. She previously served as a senior fellow at the United Nations Foundation and senior advisor to Co-Impact, which is a global collaborative philanthropy for system change. While at the UNF, she founded and served as executive director and later senior advisor of the 3D program for girls and women. She has chaired and served on numerous boards, including the Global Advisory Board of Women Lift Health, an initiative to promote women's leadership in global health, the Global Partnership for Education, and Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance. She's the recipient of numerous awards, including Interaction's Julia Taft Award for Outstanding Leadership, and let me tell you, Julia Taft was an outstanding leader, and Harvard University's Anna Rowe Award and Washington Business Journal's Women Who Mean Business Award. She has a PhD in psychology from Bangalore University and an MPhil and an MA from the University of Delhi in India. So please join me in welcoming Ambassador Gupta for a conversation about these issues.
Thank you so much for that introduction.
Well,
thank you very much. I just wanted to say that it's incredible to be in this setting. What a building. So President Ron Daniels, this is an amazing achievement.
Well, as I said, it's great to have you here as one of our very first guests. I think it's totally fitting. And I want to start out, because we have so many students here in the audience who are thinking about their own lives and careers, and for you to share with us a little bit about how you became involved in issues of women's empowerment and women's global leadership, and then what your path was to this very important role in the U.S. government as the Ambassador at Large for Global Women's Issues.
Sure, but before I go there, I also want to thank Chido. Thank you very much for inviting me. I love this initiative that you have on women's leadership, and it's great to be here at SAIS. You used to be across from my office in a previous life. I was on 1717 Massachusetts Avenue, and I watched students of SAIS walking in and out. Now that building, as I was saying to you, is part of Johns Hopkins University. So President Daniels, I should say to him if he was here that the number of buildings in Washington now that belong to Johns Hopkins University, it's pretty amazing. So I am truly honored to have this position in the Department of State, and I should say that rectifying the inequities that girls and women face around the world has been something that I have sought to do something about for my entire career. It's been both my, as I like to say, both my passion and my profession. I chose to do this work because of my formative years in Delhi, in India. I grew up there. I came to this country at the age of 30, so much later than most Indians come to this country. I came because of my husband's job. I'm a first-generation immigrant. I came with my baby daughter and had to find my way here after having done my entire education there. But it was those formative years in Delhi that exposed me to the indignities, the poverty, the inequities that women and girls experience. You could see it every day as you went to college, as you went to work, but I also saw it among my peers in college who didn't have many of the same opportunities that I had. And that is something that I began to realize that what I had in my family, I belonged to a family of professional, very strong women. I'm a third-generation working mom. My grandmother worked and ran her own school. And, you know, it was a family of very supportive men as well. And that wasn't typical in India at the time. Many of my college girlfriends got married before they finished college. And I was in an elite college in Delhi, in the capital city. So this certainly was not this sort of trajectory that most of my friends had. And so I felt committed to doing something about this issue. I should say that India is also a land of inspirational women, activists and researchers who taught me the importance of combining passion with data, and that's a much more effective way to create the case for investments in women and girls. So I learned a lot from them as well. And that's why I chose a career in research, got my PhD as well because of that, and pursued that career through various opportunities in India, mostly in academics actually initially. And then when I came here, I discovered the International Center for Research on Women, which was the only center at the time. I see my colleague sitting there, Karen Groen, that worked on women and development issues, which was my passion at that time. And so that's how I began here. I will say it wasn't easy to come late in life, to have no college networks, to try and figure out how boards work here. I became president 7 years after joining ICRW, and I burst into tears when I was told I was going to be appointed because I was so frightened to think of what that might involve, but took it on. And without going into all of the details, I had the opportunity to work in the multilateral system, in UNICEF, in a philanthropy for a bit at the Gates Foundation, and then with Co-Impact, with that nonprofit, the International Center for Research on Women. And so when I got the call from the White House to say that President Biden is thinking of nominating you for this position, would you be interested, as I was saying to Dean Steinberg earlier, I didn't give it a second thought. I said yes. It was the first time in my life that I hadn't said, let me think about it. And my husband wasn't home, and he came home and was shocked that I had accepted such a big position without a clue of what the process might involve. I knew what the job was because I knew Ambassador Viver very well. I knew Ambassador Russell as well, but was quite astounded by the process that it took. So I waited 18 months to be confirmed, but I'm thrilled to be in the position now and looking forward to hopefully doing some good. It's been less than 6 months that I've been on the job, so I'm still learning.
Well, that's a remarkable story, and I think it's a powerful story. And of course, here we really appreciate the idea of marrying kind of serious and rigorous research to sound policy. So it's great to have someone with your kind of background in these positions. We like to see our students following in that kind of path. The role, obviously, is not necessarily well known to all of our students and others in the audience here. So what does it mean to be an ambassador at large and an advisor to the Secretary? How do you conceive your role? How do you fit into the process of policy making and implementation?
So I should explain the ambassador at large, because that's kind of a weird title. And it only means that you're not ambassador to a country. You're ambassador for a sort of a functional issue, and in this case, more than half the population of the world. So the position is in the Secretary's office. It is the primary purpose of the office is to integrate a gender perspective and an understanding of the differences between women and men and their experiences into all of US foreign policy. The Biden-Harris administration has made it very clear, as has my boss, Secretary Blinken, that women's empowerment and women's rights are the cornerstone of US foreign policy. So it is a very important office. It's played an enormously effective role over the years in influencing foreign policy. So that's the biggest priority, is to integrate it across the department as well as interagency, and to make sure that the US government in all of its interactions globally is representing the views and needs and perspectives of women and girls. Having said that, we do have 3 policy priorities within the office. The first of which is to advance the women, peace, and security agenda. The second is to prevent and respond to gender-based violence. And the third is to secure women's economic opportunities and to make women economically secure, basically. So for each of those, we have a strategy that guides what we do. We also look at cross-cutting issues. So we are looking currently, for example, at the climate crisis and how that's affecting each of those priorities and how it intersects with each of those. We're also looking at advances in technology, the digital world that's out there, and AI and all of these new advancements, and what implications that has for women in each of these areas of work. So the tools that are available, which I had to learn because I'm an international development expert, and I had to learn that foreign policy tools are quite different because the foreign assistance dollars in the office are quite small. So the programming we can do is limited. So the tools that are available are essentially public, bilateral, multilateral diplomacy. So and some programming. So it's a lot of creating the platforms, the forums, the partnerships, the coalitions, to convince embassies around the world, our US posts around the world, to be able to prioritize these issues, giving them the capacities, the data that they need, the evidence that they need. So I see the office as playing a leadership role on this issue, but also being supportive of the rest of the State Department and all of the posts internationally to sort of succeed in integrating women's needs and issues into the work that we do with governments around the world. I will say that I have emphasized to my colleagues that my biggest priority is the integration piece, because I think that generally in the field of women and gender issues, we haven't done a good job in figuring out how to do what was called gender mainstreaming at the Beijing conference. We've been pretty ineffective in doing that, so trying to make that happen in a pragmatic, successful way is the biggest challenge right now. I'm also really emphasizing the sort of new advances in technology and the impact on women, because there's a lot of online harassment and abuse that I think we need to begin to pay attention to figuring out how to respond to. I'm probably saying more than I need to. I can tell you a little bit about each one of those areas of work because they're quite exciting.
Let me ask you to do that, because obviously we each have our own areas that we focused on, and peace and security has been a big one for me. And some of my colleagues know I was very involved in the Northern Ireland peace process and the extraordinary role that women played in galvanizing that process and bringing the agreement home. And it was really indispensable in my view. So I wondered, just to take an example perhaps in that area, if you could talk a little bit about either a particular case or a particular initiative that you have thinking about how to enhance the role of women in peace and security, either in a particular conflict or making it more effective more generally.
Well, let me use that as a moment to just acknowledge the horrors that we've seen over the last few days in Israel and Gaza, and just to say to you to watch women and children and the suffering that they have experienced, or all civilians, the suffering that they've experienced has been hard to watch. And I'll say that it's the reality that this is not just there, right? It's happening all over the world. So We've been dealing with Afghanistan, Sudan, Armenia, Ukraine, DRC. You know, you could go on and on. There are so many conflicts around the world. And unfortunately, the first reaction to conflict during the crisis is to bring the military leaders and the men around the table. It takes a lot of persuasion and effort to convince people that you need to have women there at the table. You need to hear women's voices. You need to have them engage in providing the solutions, in helping understand the dynamics of the conflict. And I don't say this because I have any belief that women are somehow better at peace building. I don't say this because women are inherently more peace-loving. I say this because I truly believe that a diversity of experience at any decision-making table really benefits the outcome of that decision. It's more likely to be an effective decision. And I say this, yes, because the experience of women and men in society is different. And women are not homogenous. Women are, you know, we take an intersectional approach to gender these days, and women come from all sectors of society and all levels of society with different experiences. And you want those experiences understood, especially when you're negotiating peace, because it is the most oppressed, the most marginalized, the most discriminated who experience the conflict in the worst possible way, and whose voices need to be heard so that you don't recreate the same power structures and hand the privilege again to the same folks. That can create, yet again, the instability that was at the root of the conflict in the first place. So I firmly believe that to understand the root causes of conflict and to address those root causes, you need the voices at the table of both women and men, and different kinds of women, ideally, to hear what their experience has been in the conflict. We have done that successfully now. We're trying to do it, I shouldn't say successfully, in Afghanistan. You can see all the edicts that the Taliban has put out there, but I can tell you that we have a consultative mechanism where we listen to Afghan women and hear their voices in telling us what's the most appropriate thing to do. It hasn't been easy. We're trying to also get many of the Islamic states and the Muslim nations to negotiate and talk to them and listen to them, so that they understand that they need to stand up and speak to the Taliban and negotiate freedoms for women. But the example that comes to mind as the most, how should I say, evocative example of women in leadership positions and leading a peace movement is in Liberia. As to why, you know, the whole story of how women across different religious groups came out and demanded that the men who were in power pay attention and negotiate peace, sat outside the where the negotiations were going on and locked the door and said, we won't let you out unless you come out with an agreement that makes sense, that's lasting. There is data to show that when women are involved, you are more likely to create lasting peace. There's 35% more greater chance of peace lasting more than 15 years if you have women at the table. That's just one data point. So I think that the problem is that women don't often get that opportunity. They have to work for it. They have to advocate for it. And that's what my office is trying to do. Luckily, in the US, we have a law. We have the Women, Peace and Security Act of 2017 that demands both domestically that the US, as well as internationally in all of our interactions globally, that we prioritize the participation and the leadership of women and the protection of women and girls. And that has, there's a caucus on the Hill to which we are accountable. In fact, I just reported to them yesterday because we're in the process of releasing our next strategy for women, peace and security. And they wanted to hear, you know, how has it gone so far? And I think and it has bipartisan support. So the caucus is led by a Republican and a Democrat. And I think that helps as well, because this is an issue that is of importance to both parties. So we do have support from the Hill on this issue. We have managed to create significant momentum on this issue globally, because there are many countries now, I think 18 or 20 now, that have national action plans for women, peace, and security. That at the last, we were co-chairs. The US and Romania have been co-chairs for the Focal Points Network for Women, Peace, and Security this year. And one of the first things I did when I was in office was attend the capital level meeting that was held here for the Focal Points. And I got to meet all these Focal Point women from all over the world who were advocating for women to be engaged in peace discussions and security issues in their own countries. But what was novel this time was that we invited parliamentarians as well, mostly women parliamentarians, so that we can get legislatures within countries to begin to think about how to put money behind their national action plans. Because even though there's so many national action plans out there, they're not being implemented because there's no budget for them. So if you get parliamentarians involved, I think that's, and they're more likely to get a law then, and then you get money against it. So we have said to the two co-leads on the Hill for the US caucus that we'd like to create a global caucus if we can, and get women parliamentarians more involved in this issue.
That's terrific. You mentioned, in these contexts, often women are not in a position of power, and they often are operating through civil society and through grassroots-based organizations. How do you interact with them as opposed to with parliamentarians and governments, and how do you connect with the various networks, both national and transnational, of civil society?
We have a very close relationship with civil society organizations here in the US, and all of our strategies have been informed through consultations with them. But in all of the visits, all of the travel that I've done so far, it's one of the priorities I set is to meet with civil society representatives, not just with government representatives abroad. So I had the privilege of a meeting with women civil society representatives in India when I went to attend the G20 Women's Ministerial, and learned a lot from them of what is possible to do and what the difficulties they're facing currently in trying to have their voice heard and to have their agendas move forward. So we make it a point to engage with civil society at both globally as well as within the US, and make sure that their inputs are sought in the development of our strategies. But as I said to civil society partners recently, I also hope that they will hold us accountable. I want to interact with them because I want us to be able to share with them the metrics that we have set in order to measure success, and then for them to call us out if we haven't achieved what we should be achieving.
As you think about your own efforts, you've talked a little bit about your background as an academic, but and speaking again to our students, I mean, what are the skills or things that they should be developing to be able to be effective in trying to move this agenda forward?
I think Chido mentioned authentic leadership, and I want to talk a little bit about how important that is, because I learned a few lessons when I came to this country and was suddenly put into this position of leadership. And one of the lessons I learned, because I tried initially to be the American woman leader, and I realized very quickly that it doesn't take advantage of all of my past experience of where I come from, what I have seen, what I have experienced, and that to draw on that requires me to be who I am, not who someone else is. And so I truly believe in the value of authentic leadership. And I think women, if they're authentic to their own experience, will actually add a new dimension to leadership in organizations. So let me explain what I mean. I think that, for example, I had to draw on all of your experience. I'm talking not just about your professional experience, but everything you've done. So as a young woman, I was in theater, I was even a fashion model, I was a counselor for many years, I was, I played an Indian classical music instrument. In addition to being a researcher, in addition to being an advocate and activist. And it's amazing to see now, as I've sort of gotten these leadership positions, how each of those experiences have actually made me be better as a leader than I would have been if I hadn't had that experience. So I often tell young students who come to me for advice and mentoring that don't look at your career as a linear track upward. And don't say no to opportunities just because it's not following the path you had in mind. If you get too rigid about that, you actually don't grow. That paths can go this way, and that's fine because you'll ultimately find, just to give you an example, theater taught me how to project, taught me how to use the space around me. Fashion modeling, I was a runway model, if you can believe it, taught me how to walk straight and tall and how to be comfortable with my body. And I think those things count. Those are incredibly important. And then each of us has some values that we were raised with or truly believe in. My mother's biggest value that she emphasized a lot with us was kindness. You must be kind. Whenever we brought somebody home as a friend or a boyfriend, she would say, "Is he kind? That's all that counts. Is he kind to you?" And I've carried that right to this job. My first day on the job, I spoke to the staff and I said, "I need one thing from all of you. I need kindness, because otherwise we cannot be a team." And that kindness, that empathy, that collaborative spirit, that feeling of you're all in this together has shaped my leadership in a different way from maybe somebody else might have done it. But I have seen great value in it because it's who I am. So I can be true to it with ease. It's not a put on. It's not that feeling of that you are trying to be someone else doesn't then happen anymore because you can be who you are. And sometimes that's awkward because I'm very empathetic. I find that's why I had to give up counseling. I couldn't stay separate from the problems of my patients, of my clients. And so I find myself often finding it difficult to control my tears. And so I say to a lot of young women who are seeking to be leaders, don't be afraid of that. It is somewhat embarrassing, I'll admit that. Just the other day, I was on the Hill for an event on the International Day of the Girl. And a young Afghan woman spoke who was the captain of the robotics team. She was so impressive. And she was so moving in what she said about what all she had been able to achieve and what she had lost. And then we had a congressman who spoke after her, who talked about his time in Afghanistan in the military and what he had seen as the power of girls and women there. And then I had to speak. And I just couldn't, the words wouldn't come out because I was so moved by what I had heard. So my voice broke and I was embarrassed and I sort of looked down. But the rest of what I said after that was much more effective than if I had followed my script. And so just to say, don't be afraid to be who you are is my message to students. Follow your personality and shape that into what leadership requires. Because I think there is no one prototype for leadership. Each one can shape their own. Obviously, you have to get the job done. You have to produce. You have to manage budgets. There's skills involved. But essentially, if you can reflect on what are the values that guide you, and who are you, and where did you come from, and then shape your leadership style from that, that's the most effective way to function.
That's fantastic. I can't thank you enough for that. I mean, it's such a powerful message. I mean, we do get caught up a little bit in the day-to-day of this skill or that skill, but these characteristics of leadership, and it's one of the things we do teach here at SAIS, is to get that sense, that ineffable sense of what makes people effective, and this idea of a genuine voice really makes a difference.
Can I add one little piece to that, which is that unfortunately, some styles of leadership are not rewarded in organizations. There's a certain model of leadership, which I would say is a male model of leadership, that is rewarded. And so I have seen in organizations like UNICEF, where women who have come up through the ranks get rewarded and rise through the ranks because they adopt that model of leadership and become that over time. And I can tell you that if you want to change we talk about diversity and inclusion a lot these days, but it's not just about bringing more women in or bringing more people of different races or ethnicities in. It's about rewarding different kinds of leadership as long as they're effective in doing the job, getting the job done. Instead, we reward a very traditional style of leadership. And so it's got a lot to do with performance metrics. And I tried to get that message across because otherwise women join and then they leave, or they're punished, or when push comes to shove, like when there was abuse of power was a big thing and sexual harassment was a big thing, and when complaints then are accepted against leaders who have abused power, it's interesting that the ones who get complained about are the women leaders who have adopted the male model of leadership, because why should a woman be like that? I didn't expect her to be like that, is what you hear. Whereas the men get away with it because they're supposed to be like that. So just saying to you, in the long term, it may not be as rewarding as you think it will be. So, it's just, I think organizations have to change too. The norms around what is the right leadership has to shift as well.
That's fantastic, and great words of wisdom. Let me thank you for taking the time. You've got a busy schedule. There's a lot to be done here, but it means a lot to us to have you here, and I know for our students in particular, this is insights that they will value very greatly. So thank you very much. Let me once again thank Ambassador Gupta for joining us here.
Hello again. That was amazing, wasn't it? And so, as you can see, we have a fabulous evening planned for you today. We have these amazing brainpower here, experts in their own field, accomplished women. That's our speakers, but also in this room we have a variety of women that you would really want to be interacting with today, networking with today. We have music, we have poetry, we have great food across the regions. And we are really looking forward. And then we have sessions, networking sessions, and then also mentoring sessions. So we're really looking forward to the evening as we proceed. And so at this point, I will welcome Noel Boyd to the microphone.
Hi, everyone. Hope you've all stayed relatively dry given this lovely weather we've gotten today. But it's wonderful to have all of you here with us for the SAIS Women Lead Inaugural Women's Leadership Summit. Thank you to our guest speakers again. I'm a student here at this institution, so I am immensely grateful for the opportunity to be part of the celebration, but also organize it on behalf of my peers. Now, as a student member of the SAIS Women Lead team, it is my pleasure to now introduce one of our own illustrious SAIS faculty members, SAIS Women Lead faculty affiliates, and our panel moderator today, Dr. Nargis Bajoli. Yes. Dr. Bajoli is an assistant professor here at our new campus for Johns Hopkins SAIS DC, an award-winning author, lecturer, filmmaker, and anthropologist like myself. She received her PhD in sociocultural anthropology from NYU and is trained as a documentary filmmaker under both the NYU Culture and Media Program and the NYU Tisch School of the Arts. Dr. Bajoli has previously directed oral history projects on survivors of chemical weapons and trained in the field as a political and media anthropologist, focusing her research on the intersections of media, power, and resistance in Iran and the United States. Dr. Bajoli is also the author of award-winning book, Iran Reframed, Anxieties of Power in the Islamic Republic, and she has a forthcoming publication as well with Dr. Nasser, Dr. Javed Salahi Esfahani, and Ali Veyaz, which is titled How Sanctions Work, Iran and the Impact of Economic Warfare. Beyond academia, Dr. Bajoli is also very involved in the community and is a co-founder of a nonprofit who has worked extensively also in cultural and educational collectives in Iran and Latin America. She truly embodies what it means to be part of this program's work, and she embodies what it means to be a woman leading in the field. Please allow me to welcome to the stage Dr. Nargis Bajoli. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Noel. It's wonderful to be with all of you here today. I look forward to the conversation that we're going to be having. We have a really stellar panel, and I would like to welcome them to the stage. We'll read out their names first, welcome them, and then I'll read out their bios so that we can get the discussion going, which I'm really looking forward to. So with us today, we have Dr. Katie Pike. We have Gargi Ghosh and Wendy Taleki, and if we can all welcome them to the stage. I will first introduce Dr. Kathy Pike. She is a professor of psychology at Columbia University's Irving Medical Center. She serves as the chair of the Faculty Steering Committee for the Global Mental Health Programs, is a director of the World Health Organization Collaborating Center for Capacity Building and Training in Global Mental Health at Columbia University, and is the deputy director of the Health and Aging Policy Fellows Program, as well as the senior supervising psychologist at the Center for Eating Disorders at Columbia University Irving Medical Center. Welcome.
Thank you.
Next to her, we have Gargi Ghosh, who is the president of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation's Global Policy and Advocacy Division. She's a member of the Foundation's executive leadership team and is accountable for the organization's worldwide government affairs, development policy, resource mobilization partnerships, and advocacy campaigns. And she lives right here in Washington, D.C. Welcome. And last but definitely not least, we have Wendy Taleki, who is the head of the WIFI Secretariat, which is housed in the World Bank Group. The Secretariat is responsible for supporting the WIFI Governing Committee in the allocation and supervision of its funding, as well as communications, advocacy, and learning focus on strengthening opportunities for women entrepreneurs in collaboration with other stakeholders. Welcome. So I wanted to start out the program tonight by asking each of you, especially in the post-COVID world, we're seeing a world that has many more challenges than in the pre-COVID world, and it seems like many challenges that are erupting at the same time together in various parts of the world. So how has this post-COVID world and the various challenges that are arising, how are you all dealing with it? Has it changed the focus of what you've been doing, and how are you sort of dealing with these multiple crises at the same time, and how you're approaching your work?
I'll start, and we'll each share some reflections. I'm going to start with reflections around mental health, right, in the global mental health sphere. By referencing 2013, I was asked to speak at a big multinational corporation, 200,000 plus employees, about mental health, but I couldn't say mental health or mental illness because they were too stigmatizing, pathologizing, alienating. 2014, for the first time for the G7 in their global health agenda, I was invited to speak and talk about mental health, the first time it was ever mentioned. Then the pandemic hits and the curtain is just pulled wide open. And we now know the data are absolutely clear that the burden around mental health is enormous. And what we're really talking about is the burden of untreated mental illness, not addressing mental health. 1 in 4 people will have a mental health condition. Today, 2,000 people will die around the globe by suicide. 2,000 people every day. We've got estimates of cost that are something like $16 to $20 trillion over the course of from 2011 to 2030 in terms of lost economic productivity, lowest worker mental health standards. So it's clear, and the younger generations are leading with mental health. So the conversation has transformed globally. And it's not just high-income countries, it's across the board. And the intersection between mental health and gender is enormous when we think about development policies. So just one example there, if we take, for example, perinatal depression, right? Thriving development, economic development, depends on a healthy, prosperous society. That means engagement of all members of society. But when we live in a gender unequal world, where there's gender inequality, we see for women elevated levels of violence, interpersonal violence, lack of access to health care, lack of access to reproductive health care. It's associated with more frequent pregnancies. It's associated with increased rates of depression. When women are depressed and it doesn't get treated, it results in increased risk of depression for children, lower educational achievement, and we're now into the second generation of reduced economic development. So my plea would be that as we think about development, that we think about mental health and we think about it through a gendered lens.
I'm happy to try and follow that. First, thank you for having me, and Ambassador Gupta, it is so nice to be able to finally call you that officially. It was great to hear you before. So, we, for better or for worse, we work on issues of inequity that predate the pandemic by a long way. So if you look at kids who die before their 5th birthday, maternal health, access to financial services, all of that was deeply unequal by country, by gender, certainly, by income level. And so our work, I would say, was sort of established years before the pandemic. And then it all got a little harder. We saw for the first time in decades malaria cases going up, women going back to giving birth at home instead of facilities because so much was closed down during the pandemic. I would say for us, it's not that our core issues have changed, it's not that our core work has changed, but for a while after the pandemic, we were all, certainly in my personal life, but also in my professional, was kind of waiting for it to go back to normal so we could just get back to normal. And it took a while to realize that something has been let loose that is changing the world pretty fundamentally. And now we're trying to be pragmatic in engaging communities, government leaders, activists, households, knowing that we are operating in a different world. So let me just give you an example of what that means in practice. For governments, we work a lot in Africa, for example, but this is true globally. When I started at the foundation, we were in an era of global growth. We were thinking about how to grow government budgets. Tax bases were on the rise. Foreign direct investment was coming into most of the countries where we worked. Today, we're talking about a debt crisis. Governments are having to make choices between debt service payments and keeping their health budgets stable. And so we're talking a lot more than we did 20 years ago about cost-effective innovation. It's not just the best new tool to fight malaria, but it's the tool that is affordable, that is going to be cheap and accessible faster. So in all kinds of ways, geopolitically, obviously, we're having to create new ways of making space that I think we assumed were ours 20 years ago.
Thanks. So, is my mic okay? Yeah. So thanks, first of all, for having me and having us in this beautiful place. It's really an honor to be here, and wonderful to see this building come to life in this way, and to be back at SAIS. So I work at the World Bank in a program called the Women Entrepreneurs Finance Initiative, which is dedicated to supporting women entrepreneurs in developing countries. And we focus particularly on small and medium enterprises. So we're looking to support women entrepreneurs, not just to build subsistence businesses, but to build businesses that can grow, can innovate, can increase productivity and growth for their countries. So really an area where we feel like women can be leaders and that can elevate the women and their employees to have better lives. And we've been doing this now. We work not just with the World Bank, but also with the private sector arm, the IFC, and also the other multilateral development banks. So we work with the African Development Bank, the Asian Development Bank, EBRD, Islamic Development Bank, and the Inter-American Development Bank. So we're able to look at the question of entrepreneurship as a women's leadership issue and a women's economic empowerment issue and as a labor force participation issue. Why is that important for women in developing countries? Women in developing countries are twice as likely to see entrepreneurship as a path out of poverty and as a job opportunity than women in developed countries. So entrepreneurship is a critical part of the growth story for women entrepreneurs. And their challenges, the challenges that they face as women are myriad, but then as entrepreneurs, it's even harder because SMEs have a hard time. And as women, they face the same social norms, the same barriers in their economies, that face women in those countries. So we're trying to look at these issues and really address them across the ecosystem, not only looking at social norms and biases in the institutions that work with them, but also looking at the policy side and the financing side, training capacity, working across these issues. And women had a hard time before the crisis, and when COVID hit, what we thought was progress, we thought we were moving on a wave of progress, and it was just a matter of accelerating that progress, and we really took a step back. So we found during the crisis that women were twice as likely to be rejected for loans. Because they have businesses that are lower margin and smaller. They were the first affected by supply chain issues, financing issues, people having, then they had a lot of challenges with the care economy and not being able to manage their own worker because women employ more women. They were not able to deal with the care needs that they had during the crisis. So it went from being a big challenge to kind of an urgent crisis. And just to give one story, we have a woman we've worked with and I've gotten to know really well over the last couple of years who got a loan through our program during COVID in Nigeria. And she's a baker. And during the pandemic, her business was extremely affected by all the shutdowns and everything, but bread is something that people still need. So their demand was actually quite high, but all of their systems were breaking apart. When I first met her, the big problem she was dealing with was the Ukraine and Russia conflict because wheat prices and wheat supply chains had blown up. So here's an entrepreneur in Nigeria who's affected by the war in Ukraine very, very seriously. And now she has impacts that are related to climate effects. She has impacts still related to the unsolved care economy issues, to youth issues, because most of her employees are young. So these things are all compounding for these women, and it's really urgent that we take an approach not just to solve a specific problem, but to work across all of those challenges that they're facing.
And you know, the crisis in the care economy is not just in other places, but very much here too, with women reeling from the after effects of COVID, and then it just piling up and more and more. So Dr. Pike, I wanted to hone in on this question of mental health with you. And in thinking about it, as you were sort of making your case about taking very seriously mental health as a development issue, how do we think of that in scale, right? So how can we scale up programs and questions of mental health on sort of the scales that folks who go into development really think about and that you all are sort of dealing with?
So there are a number of things. One point to make that's really important is that the increasing rates of mental disorders reflect an unhealthy environment in which we live, right? Our genetics haven't changed. So the rates of serious mental illness that are genetically highly driven, less responsive to environmental risks, those rates are about the same as they've been for a long time. But the rates of anxiety, depression, eating disorders, those have really climbed. So there are two ways to think about scale. One is that we take evidence-based treatments, and our center at Columbia is a hub for a global network of 25,000 clinicians or more who are trained in evidence-based treatments that are adapted to be culturally appropriate, leveraging technology. Mental health is slow in terms of healthcare and bringing technology in, but it's coming, so that we've got treatments where they're needed. But we also need to roll this back in terms of scaling and work with the systems that exist that are part of what's creating this increased epidemic, we might say, of anxiety and depression and eating disorders and PTSD. Those are highly, highly environmentally driven, right? So we need to work on these systems that we're talking about. We need to think that actually addressing at scale issues of anxiety and depression requires thinking about technology and what's happening in terms of the technology overload. We need to go upstream, right, to the protection and promotion. We need to work with private industry. People who are employed spend more time working than any other activity in their waking day. So how is work designed today, and in what ways is work designed to protect and promote our mental health, and in what ways is it really tearing down our mental health? And there are systems issues and structural issues. Back to what the ambassador was saying, we need to be thinking not only about the individual carrying the symptom, but how do we move upstream to structure and systems? If we do that, we can really operate at scale. And so I think we need to be working with governments, with ministries around policies. We need to be working with the private sector. And we need to be thinking upstream about how do we leverage what we know. You know, there's an expression that one of the most profound and best kept secrets about systems and structures of our institutions is that we created them. So we can change them. And we need the voices of women and the next generation to change the structures and systems so that they work for us. And when we do that, we will have scaled effects.
If we weren't at such a public event, I'd come over and give you a hug. Because as an anthropologist, I'm constantly telling my students and trying to teach them, we created this world we live in. We created it. Nobody else created it but humans. And so we have to understand that as our creation, and the things that we need to change in it is, like you're saying, we created these systems.
Except who we are is a shifting we. Yes. And so we need to think about who we are, all of us.
Yes, key. Yes.
Gargi, I want to turn to you and all the really important work that you all do and sort of think about advocacy campaigns. And right now they're taking on so many different forms, whether online, offline, and all the spaces that they are. But how do they really play a role in shaping public opinion in various ways and then influencing policy debates, and then how that then trickles, over to the kinds of work that you all do? So kind of helping us connect the dots between these different spaces.
Sure. Well, I started life as an economist, and I think if you still shook me in the middle of the night, I would want to believe that social change happens just because there's great evidence that it should. And I am not giving up that hope. But in the meantime, my journey, as the ambassador was saying before, has really been to find other tools that help make social change happen, because that's in the end what we're working on. It's not just about getting a new vaccine into the pipeline. It's about making sure we have access to healthcare. We have an affordable, reliable way to educate kids. And so I think about my work in terms of social change. So for me, it's a kind of simple 3 Ps framework that I keep coming back to: policy, politics, and public opinion. For me, those 3 things are essential to any broad-based change. So just to give you an example of how that works, and maybe one that is successful and one that's a lot harder. So anti-tobacco campaigns, stop smoking campaigns. Almost anywhere in the world, if you think about them, the policy we've known for years and years. We know what works, and it's usually some combination of pricing through tax or other mechanisms, packaging, youth restrictions. The evidence and policy base is super strong, but it doesn't work on its own, and government often has a hard time implementing those policies because of the tobacco lobby, or because tobacco farmers are a core part of constituencies. And so if you combine the policy with the politics, you need to start looking at income replacement for tobacco farmers, for example. You need to start looking at legal defense funds, because the tobacco lobby will create a flurry of lawsuits. But then you also have to think about public sentiment, because if demand is there, it turns out smoking is addictive and people will find money even when they shouldn't find money to buy more and more expensive cigarettes. And so something that has been super successful in many countries is actually to target social media, radio, pop culture, ads to young people before it's like young adults, teens, 20s, and some of the campaigns we've seen in Botswana, in South Africa, have just been, that have been most effective have been, in this case, girls speaking to girls about why you shouldn't smoke. And it turns out that is remarkably more effective than Surgeon General, experts, because you respond to someone you relate to. And I don't know why it took us so long to understand this. It's so obvious when you talk about it, but that has been an incredibly successful sort of triumvirate of interventions. Maybe in a brief way to talk about something that's much harder, I've been thinking a lot about how in a very crowded world, when we all are thinking about climate, conflict, so many challenges, how do we keep the cause of development, of gender equality, of access to healthcare top of mind for people? And I'm thinking US, UK, countries where we depend on the generosity of aid budgets It's not the only source of financing, it's not a major source of financing, but for so much of what we do, the fight against AIDS, the fight against malaria, maternal health, we do rely on aid. And the popular support for development assistance has really declined. Sometimes it's just lack of awareness. Sometimes it's actually thinking, well, we have so many problems here. Why are we sending our money elsewhere? And so we've really been thinking about, again, the policy is clear. We know how to make development assistance effective. The politics are tough. How do you build bases of support? Well, gosh, it turns out there's universities around the country who are doing great work on global health, on development policy. But we've been thinking a lot about public mobilization and how you connect to a next generation of people who think that generosity and engagement globally is part of a nation's standing in the world. So I'm looking for great ideas on that.
Great, thank you. In your work with women entrepreneurs around the world, Wendy, you know, I would imagine a topic that comes up a lot is access to capital. And that consistently, I mean, even in what you were saying in your opening remarks about how much more difficult it is for women to get loans than it is for men. So how, you know, that's often cited as one of the major challenges to women. What innovative financing options are there, or do you all think about, or programs available to support these different women entrepreneurs?
Thank you. It certainly is one of the most important constraints that women entrepreneurs face. It's not the only one. But it's a very important one, and it is a big goal of WeFi to help expand financing for women-led SMEs. There's about a $1.7 trillion financing gap for women entrepreneurs around the world, and we think of it as a constraint and a challenge, but we want financial institutions to think of it as an opportunity for growth, and to think of that as a new market segment that they can really serve and serve effectively to help them grow. So we work with about, we have about, I've mentioned we're in 67 countries. About half of our programs focus on access to finance. We work with about 400 different partners in those countries, and most of those are IDA and low-income countries. So these are, you know, around the developing world. And we work with different types of financial institutions. So we work with banks, obviously. We work a little bit with microfinance institutions, but only when they're working on upscaling into the SME space. We do work with insurance companies because risk is really, you know, a serious thing that women underinvest in insurance. We work with some fintechs, and we also work with the fund, the VC, and accelerator space. So we work across all the different forms of capital that women get access to. But the fundamentals are the same. Women are not getting access to finance. They don't have collateral. They don't have a track record. They might not have the data. They might be informal, and so they might not lack the formal structures that they're looking for. They run lower margin businesses, so that it's harder for them to leverage with debt. And there's, of course, bias in the systems, in their societies, but also in the institutions that are serving them. So we work with financial institutions to help them understand the market and understand the opportunity that they're missing, help them develop products and services that will meet the needs of women, which means products that maybe have lower collateral requirements, maybe they have different terms or tenors for repayment. They might have better access, so women have more challenges getting to a bank or getting access. So the digital revolution is really, really critical for getting more funding out to women. And also bundling services, because women actually are better clients, they're more reliable clients, and they're more loyal clients, and they're lower risk clients for banks, but they need to have a good service, and so you need to bundle you know, a variety of services so they can use it as a one-stop shop, and they'll be very loyal and refer others as well. So we work on the product side and understanding the market, but whenever we work with banks, we nearly always also work on the internal issues. So most banks in the markets that we're in, they might not think they have any biases in their institutions, but when you look at it, you know, when you shine a light on their practices and their management structures, their pay structures, the way they think about their clients and treat their clients and the customer experience of their client, they realize, if they're well-intentioned, they realize that they have a lot of work to do. And so we work with them on that as well and make sure that they do that. And one piece that unites both the internal looking and the external product development is data. So we have major challenges with data. And the way it presents is you go to a bank CEO and you say, we'd like to help you do more to lend to women. We maybe can issue a bond with you, or we can do a credit line with you, or we can help build up your equity pool. And they say, we don't have a problem. We treat women just as equally as we treat men. And we say, oh, okay, well, show us your data. Where, can you show us how many women you're serving versus men? And they never have that data. So we say, okay, we'll work with you to get the data. And the numbers end up being 10%, 7% of their SME portfolio, maybe 15%. There are some countries where they're quite good, like you look at the Philippines and a few other places. But generally, the numbers are very, very surprising. So data is a really critical piece of the puzzle. And because we sit at the intersection of working, we also work a lot on the policy side with regulators, because we sit at the World Bank, but all of our MDB partners work with governments as well as with the private sector. And so what we've done is, and we just announced this last week now at the World Bank annual meetings, we've created a new program called the We Finance Code, which is meant to bring together the regulators, the banks, and other financial institutions in each country, but it's a global program, to address the data gap so that all financial institutions in the country will be collecting data on how many women entrepreneurs are being financed. Right now, the OECD tries to collect that data. Only 5 countries are reporting how much financing is going to women-led businesses in their countries. So we want those numbers to go up. And we also are using this as an opportunity to identify leaders in the financial sector, whether it's leaders in the central bank, whether it's leaders in the banks, the Bankers Association, the fintechs, and try to elevate women in the financial sector, because we know that women, if they're in management and in investment decision-making roles, they're much more likely to get financing out the door to women. So in the fund space, it's about 2 times. If you have a woman sitting at the table making investment decisions, they're twice as likely to invest in women. So we need more women in the financial institutions. We need more women in the regulatory bodies, in the standard-setting bodies. All of those are going to help get money out the door to women entrepreneurs. And so we're trying to connect the dots and pull all those pieces together.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Kathy, how, and this idea of authentic leadership that was mentioned earlier, and that's such a core part of SAIS Women Lead. How do, authentic leaders sort of maintain their own resilience and tend to their own mental health while addressing, especially in the type of spaces that we're thinking of when they're addressing relentless global crises around the world?
So, a few ideas on that. It really resonated for me what the ambassador shared about authentic leadership. So to start, I think the first thing is to know oneself and what we need, how do we refuel, right? So how do I refuel is going to be different from how somebody else nourishes herself or himself, their self. And I'm a beekeeper. So I go out to my hives and I just watch the bees, which, by the way, honeybees are 90% of those bees that are going out and bringing back the nectar to make honey are female. But for me, I could be there, and in an hour or two, it's just like I've been transported to another world. So I think the first thing is to know what that is for you. A second is, in terms of mental health, global mental health, huge mental health issues follow crises. But we always say the individuals who respond best in crisis are those who are doing all the work before the crisis, right? So taking care of ourselves at this time is also about how do we build communities that support us, and build organizations and networks so that when we're in trouble and when we need help, we can authentically say, I need help and I'm vulnerable. And that depends on investing before you need it, right? So I think that's a really important piece to consider. How do we invest? How do you put money in the bank? How do you put resilience in the bank to have those reserves when the time comes? And I think that organizational support, cultural support, social supports are critical at those times and depend on high level of trust. So it's a long-term investment for those moments when we need to take care of ourselves. And the third thing that I would say, share, which I used to be shy about saying this, but I've just decided I'm just going to say it, which is I think it is incumbent upon us at times that are really difficult to maintain hope and optimism and figure out where, how, why, who helps us maintain hope and optimism. Because, and I think about that around this idea of authentic leadership and gendered leadership. I used to be shy about saying it because it was sort of like girly, and it was sort of like soft skills, and it was sort of like very nice, right? But actually, if you really think about it, at this moment, when we are all so fatigued by the world around us, the idea, the work that it takes, the resources it takes, the resilience it takes, the digging deep that it takes to remain hopeful and optimistic is maybe the hardest thing we're asked to do. And so let's lean into it, because if we do, we will surround ourselves with people that bring hope and optimism. And the truth is that darkness will never beat darkness, right? The only thing that beats darkness is light. So let's create the energy, let's create the space, let's create the engagements that help us have the world we want to have, and that will help us through the hardest times.
Thank you. Gargi, I wanted to please add. Yes.
And if that's not enough, don't be afraid to pursue treatment for mental health needs.
Gargi, I wanted to ask, specifically in the work that you all do, there's so much emphasis on public-private partnerships, and how, could you give us from your perspective some of the examples of successful because there's also a lot of critique of public-private partnerships. So what are the ways in which they've worked well, and what you've seen, and why? What helps make that soup be a good one?
Well, this is going to sound like I'm trying to make a segue from inspiring personal advice to public-private partnerships, but I actually believe there's a common thread on the authentic leadership point, which is that in my experience, partnerships work best when you're letting all parts of the partnership do what they do best. If I think about partnerships that I've been a part of that didn't work, let's say the philanthropy, industry, government, we were always trying to make one of the entities different than their core incentives, structures, ways of working. So we wanted, most often we wanted industry to do something that didn't have economic reward. And we were gonna finagle first loss facilities, offtake agreements, whatever it was to make that. Those are fleeting partnerships because you haven't solved sort of underlying incentives. And for me, I wouldn't have used these words, these same words, but this concept of authenticity really resonates for me here too. The strongest partnerships we've built have actually allowed organizations to show up with their best DNA, not their worst DNA, their best DNA. And so, if you think about Gavi, for example, Vaccine Alliance, around that board sit vaccine manufacturers, donor countries, countries needing vaccines, low and middle income countries for the most part, patient groups, philanthropy. And what happens now is, I was part of that board years ago when everyone was very careful. There was a kind of code that you had to reach. There were things unset. Today, it is a much healthier partnership because industry can show up and say, well, here's why we can't do that. That's never going to work for us because, and you could subsidize it for a second, but then it will revert. Patient groups are showing up saying, no, this is not something we agreed to. We need to be part of the conversation on this. And it leads to a much healthier partnership. And so I think, the same way I think about my leadership team or my own role and voice, that authenticity is also what has made the best professional partnerships for us as well.
That's such a great way of answering that question. Thank you. Wendy, if we extend, this concept again of authentic leadership to both the work that you help lead, but also how it extends into the field of women entrepreneurship and the ecosystems that are required, right? Mm-hmm. So, one concept is we need to consistently show up as our authentic selves, and that in and of itself slowly can change some of these systems. But also, what are the ecosystems necessary to both allow for that and to strengthen that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So a big part of our work is working on the support structures for women entrepreneurs. So more on the, I talked before about the supply side of financing, but more on the demand side. So how do women, how do they build their skills, their capabilities to interact with banks, other financial institutions, governments, if they're interested in procurement opportunities, things like that. And so, we need to build up these institutions. Sometimes they're NGOs, sometimes they're universities, sometimes they're private companies, sometimes they're government agencies, to enable them to really, improve the skill set. It might be work on technology, trying to bring more technology to women entrepreneurs. And we work, I mentioned we work with accelerators also, and that's really a group that really is focused on that link between training, capacity building, and setting up the abilities of the entrepreneurs so that they can access, in that case, equity financing. So there's a lot of work we do in that area, and the training is one piece. I mean, for one thing, what we found is, everybody can benefit from some technical training on either their areas of specialty or, standards, global standards, things like that, or just how to run a business, how to keep the books. But what's also really important for women is helping them understand, the kind of the psychosocial elements of entrepreneurship and risk-taking, and really, the ambition that they can have as an entrepreneur, and not just seeing, themselves as kind of, maybe this is the secondary income source for the family, this is a secondary, little project I have, but really thinking about their business as a growth opportunity and as a real, how they can prioritize that for growth, not just for stable income and also for growth. So we want to be looking at that side and building up the service providers to be able to understand both sides of those equations is really important. But a lot of what I see the women coming out of these programs from, and it gets back to the authentic leadership, is the networks that they're building when they're in these training programs. So one is the networks among women entrepreneurs, And that has a lot to do with the stories that they're telling each other about their lives, and hopefully that the organizations that are working with them are also telling them. So when I feel that energy kind of builds into a permanent source of support, so these are networks that can permanently support entrepreneurs, is when they get to the root of the challenges that they're facing, and they can talk authentically with each other and share the actual stories of what's happening with them. It might be the childcare challenges that they had, or maybe they had a miscarriage and that's affected something in the way that the trajectory of their lives have moved. It may be just coming from the economic situation that they're coming from, or family situation that they have. We have a lot of women, and the pandemic made it much worse with gender-based violence. So having peers where you're also striving in a business sense, but you also are, you're struggling and you're able to share that. And as leaders, I think being able to share those stories of ours is also very important, because it gives other people permission to do that as well. So this is part of also helping the new cohort of entrepreneurs become authentic leaders and not during the pandemic, I learned a lot because, I was on Zoom calls with some of our leadership champions, and the U.S. is one of our generous donors, and they have a leadership champion who's very senior at a global bank. And we had a call with her. We were interviewing her, and in the background, she was, giving instructions to her daughter on how to bake a cake for her husband's birthday. And so you see, we kind of peeled back the curtain a little bit on people are normal people. They have regular lives. Nobody is, has these lives that are, perfect. So giving new entrepreneurs that permission to say, this is my whole life. My job, my work, often it is in their home. It's with their family. So they have to be okay saying that, and we have to be okay modeling that as well.
That's great. As we sort of close out, I want to ask each of you, especially to talk to our students, and what kind of advice or things that you wish you had known when you were in the position of leaving grad school and going off into the different paths that you may have gone into. As the ambassador said, none of this is linear, and what do you wish you had known, or what would you say to that person now?
So I completed my education at SAIS, and then I did my doctoral work in clinical psychology. And to your point, Ambassador, about the zigzag of life, I thought, I loved my studies as an international studies scholar, and would I ever be able to get back around and bring these worlds together? And here I sit running, a global center for mental health connected to the World Health Organization, and so trusting yourself to pursue opportunities and interests and just staying true to that, I think really is so important, because there are a lot of people who are successful who are very unsuccessful in life. So not losing your center is essential to being successful at work and in life. And the other thing I would say to all of you is hope and optimism. Here we are, because your generation is the generation that is entering the workforce, saying, like on interviews, and we do all this work with workplaces. So I'm considering this job. What are the mental health benefits of this position? I mean, the HR people are coming to us going, like they can't even believe this. You mean you don't have mental health leave? And I'm like, you just stay with it, because the questions you're asking are, you have workplaces, people making decisions in the workplace. Back to the point about doing what you do best, workplaces have agendas, right? And mental health was not really their agenda until they realized that their reputation, recruitment, retention, best talent, they're going to lose if they don't pay attention to mental health. And so I would say continue, doing what you're doing. You bring the world, you are the hope and optimism of the future. So thank you.
Well, I had a sort of profound moment of, I guess, enlightenment, sort of early mid-career. Until that point, I had been on the straight and narrow. The path was vertical. It was very well established. I was in a very male-dominated field. I'm sure on my way to adopting sort of a very leadership characteristics that wouldn't have been true to myself. And I found myself in a hiring situation with my boss, and we were looking at resumes. And she looked at, we were going through my resumes, they were all great, and I said, well, how about this one? This one looks great. And she said, yeah, I don't see any imagination in that resume. And it was like the car screeched to a halt for me, wait a second, that's a thing? That's a thing you might look for in a very elite job and institution? And it just set me on this journey of trying to think about what that means and what that might mean for me. And I have absolutely carried that to the way I think about teams and hiring now. So for me, the message would be find experiences that fulfill you and trust that those add up to a meaningful career. Of course, you have to do all the things like be great at your job, but that isn't enough. Finding those experiences, saying yes to the experiences that inspire you, that fulfill you, to me, make you great at your job.
Yeah, so I guess along a similar theme, when I was out of undergrad, I moved to Ukraine, or the Soviet Union at the time, wanting to focus on working with feminist organizations in the new Soviet Union. And I ended up living there for 4 years and not working on women's issues at all, because what I realized was the challenge was really economic. And as Ukraine became independent, I lived there, and then I ended up working with IFC on privatization of the economy. So I kind of let the gender stuff go and spent most of my career working on small business development and economic growth issues, and stayed mostly within IFC and the World Bank, but doing lots of different things. I worked on grants, I worked on investments, I worked on change management, advisory, so lots of different activities. But always following my passion. Now I had a very unlinear path in the World Bank Group, and ultimately when I got the call, and Geeta, you mentioned Karen Groen was involved also with the call to ask if I wanted to join WeFi, and it was kind of like everything came full circle. And it was now, working on women's issues, on economic growth, on SMEs, building up that core expertise of knowing how, you build small businesses, how you build growth, and then layering on the gender component has been, just for me, kind of the dream come true of all these things coming full circle. So to me, it's really about, finding the path that works for you and trusting that ultimately you'll end up in the right place. And then the other thing I would just say is the thing that's really sustained me over these years, especially with trying to combine, family and career, and my husband's here and my daughter's here today, it was really my girlfriends, and many of them were SAIS friends, and others were friends from when the kids were little, and those networks really sustain you. And when you're not quite ready to call the doctor for the mental health, they're the ones you're calling, every day sometimes to get through the challenges that you have. And if you can have those confidants who can help you through both the work and the personal, and understand how the dynamics of how those two things interact, it's really precious. Mm-hmm.
So thank you all so much. This is wonderful. And we look forward to chatting more with you all as the evening goes on and to continuing with our program. So if you'll join me one last time in giving a round of applause to our wonderful speakers.
So one more time for this wonderful panel. Before the evening proceeds any further, I want to thank the awesome teams that have worked tirelessly to set up this event today. Setu Van Leer Hodges, Claire Crane, Noel Boyd, Sandrine Irakunde, and others. And a huge thank you to events team, Brittany Menina and her team, Dar Khadija Hill and her team, Malcolm's Jen Zhu and her team, and all others. Thank you all so very much. And so I have the immense pleasure of introducing our keynote tonight. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie was born in Enugu, Nigeria in 1977. And so, you know, like, yeah, sobering thoughts for some of us, right? As to how someone so young can achieve so much, right? But again, this is we just talked about mental health, so everyone on their own path, right? She grew up on the campus of the University of Nigeria in Nsukka, where her father was a professor and her mother was the first female registrar. She studied medicine for a year at Nsukka and then left for the US at the age of 19 to continue her education on a different path. She graduated summa cum laude from Eastern Connecticut State University with a degree in communication and political science. She has a master's degree in creative writings from Johns Hopkins University, whoop, whoop, and a master's of art degree in African history from Yale University. No? She's been awarded several prestigious fellowships, including the Harder Fellowship at Princeton University and a Radcliffe Institute of Harvard University. In 2008, she received a MacArthur Fellowship. She has received honorary doctorate degrees from various universities, including the Johns Hopkins University, Duke University, Amherst College, SOAS University of London, American University, the list goes on. Ms. Adichie's work has been translated into over 30 languages. Her first novel, Purple Hibiscus, which she wrote in 2003, won the Commonwealth Writers' Prize. And her second novel, Half of a Yellow Sun, came out in 2006, won the Orange Prize. Her 2013 novel, Americana, won the US National Book Critics Circle Award and was named one of the New York Times top 10 best books of 2013. She has delivered 2 landmark TED Talks, her 2009 TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story, and her 2012 TEDx Houston Talk, We Should All Be Feminists, which started a worldwide conversation about feminism, was published as a book in 2014. Ms. Adichie divides her time between the United States and Nigeria, where she leads an annual creative writing workshop. And so that's written. Now let me tell you the unwritten one. So she is one of the, you want her as a friend, as a sister. And so that's where I'm lucky. Eat your hearts out. No? All right, please join me in welcoming to the podium for her keynote, Chimamanda Adichie.
Hello. Wow. I hadn't realized how many people were here. It's really nice to be here. I want to start by saying thank you to Vice Dean Chiedo Wankwo, who is, for me, an example of what leadership should look like. She's thoughtful, she's open-minded, she's kind, and she is very, very smart. So thank you, Chido, for having me, really. I'm so sorry that I missed what appears to have been a fantastic presentation by Ambassador Gupta, and I am going to go look for it afterwards. Chido couldn't stop talking about it. I just love this panel. Thank you. I felt that I was learning so much, and I also felt, to use that expression that is that young people say, I felt seen. So authentic leadership. I've had the good fortune of visiting a number of colleges here in the US, and apparently leadership programs are very popular. And I think it's reflective of a certain kind of ethos, American ethos, where leadership is a thing. But I do find myself thinking, well, if everyone is going to be a leader, who's going to be led? But maybe leadership skills, maybe that also makes you a good follower, led. I want to frame this keynote around the question, what advice would I give a person who is an emerging leader about including women in leadership? And the lovely thing about giving advice is that you can pontificate as much as you like, because you're just dispensing it, you're not actually receiving it. Or maybe I will frame it as things to keep in mind if we are to achieve the goal of including women in leadership. So a year ago, I attended an event in which Hillary Clinton spoke, and I was struck by this line from her speech. Equality of women is the great unfinished work of the 21st century. And I was struck by it because it seemed a really optimistic statement, because it assumed that the work will be finished. And I'm not sure that it will be in this century, but we can make progress, and we have made progress. And I think that including women in positions of leadership, real leadership, and when I say that, it's because often companies will say we have women in real leadership, but really the women are not in the positions of real power. I think including women in leadership is essential to this question of equality. And the case for including women is not that women are better than men, or that women will necessarily make better leaders. It is simply that women are human and make up half the world's population and have historically been unfairly excluded. So we know that changing laws and policies and having what is often called best practices are all important for creating change, but I have always believed that culture should be given primacy. Not because it is more important than economics or law or politics, but because it is the most complex, the most layered, and the most difficult to change. I think cultural change happens with storytelling and with human creativity. I am, of course, biased because I'm a writer, and literature is the love of my life. But I know from my life as a reader, not just a writer, that stories can profoundly change the way we look at the world. I have also always believed that we can create a world that is much better than we have, more equal, more just. And it may be naive, but I think perhaps we should embrace a considered naivete from time to time. And so the first thing I think an emerging leader should keep in mind on the subject of including women is embrace a considered naivete from time to time. I have had the good fortune of traveling quite a bit and meeting women in different parts of the world, and I have become convinced that there is a universal female experience. It is shaped by race, by class, by culture. I have dear friends, for example, fierce feminists who are white, but who also have an alarming blind spot on race and how racism affects Black women. I often worry that because I am privileged by class, that I have an alarming blind spot on how class affects women. But the universal experience that I speak about is more emotional than not. For example, the women I meet in different parts of the world are all familiar with the idea of shrinking themselves to accommodate male egos. They're familiar with putting their dreams aside, suspending their aspirations. They're familiar with being the ones who are expected to compromise in heterosexual relationships. They're familiar with their bodies being seen not as belonging to them, but to their husband or their community or their religion or their legal system. I just want to say a little bit about this, that I just find it really surreal to be told that your body does not belong to you, whether it is in communities that practice female genital mutilation or honor killings, or in communities where abortion rights do not exist. Now, I think pregnancy can be a glorious, wondrous gift for those who want it. But for those who do not, it is not. And it is strange to be told that something that can potentially kill you is something that you do not have control over. And as I say this, I want to pause to remember all the women who have died in childbirth or from pregnancy complications. And there's an alarming number of that in Nigeria. Most of all, the women I have met are familiar with internalizing their resentments and their anger until it scars their souls and leaves them mentally exhausted. So I want to tell you a story, and this happened about 12 years ago when there was a boom in tech startups in West Africa, East Africa. And of course, the startups were mostly started by men, very few women. One of those women was a Kenyan who lived in Nairobi. And so from time to time, young people who wanted to do these tech startups would pitch to venture capitalists. And so at one of those pitch meetings, which I think happened in Cape Town, this Kenyan woman was the only woman who was presenting. And so she presented her idea and she asked for money, and then afterwards the feedback that she got was that she was not relatable and that she was not likable. And the men got the money, she didn't. So she didn't see much of a difference in the overall structure of her presentation and that of the men. And so she decided to name what she thought the problem was. And so the next time she made a pitch to venture capitalists, she said very quietly, "I'm a woman, and in our culture, we think women shouldn't be too ambitious, or women who ask for money are judged more harshly. And so I am asking you to please keep this in mind as you listen to me." And she says that this worked, or must have worked, because she didn't get the money, but the next time that she did this, she did get the money. But what was even more telling was that the feedback she got changed, and so now was more specific and more technical. And so I think that naming things with nuance, with respect, but with boldness can make a difference. Because we must first give something a name in order to change it. I also think that how we name things is important. It is important to name without contempt, to name with the assumption of good faith. She didn't think that the venture capitalists were necessarily bad people, and quite frankly, if there had been a woman among the venture capitalists, that woman would probably have done the same thing. Sometimes we're blinded by norms, and for most of human history, cultural norms have generally not accorded women the same dignity that it accords men. And so because we are often blinded by norms, it is important to be alert to our own judgments. Misogyny, I like to say, is in the air that we breathe, and men and women breathe that air. And misogyny can be big, like physical violence, but can also be small, like who you give room to fail, or who you give a second chance, or who you assume is competent. Both big and small manifestations of misogyny are significant. So another pontificating bit for emerging leaders: data is very important, but please look very carefully at the nuances of data collection, especially when it concerns women. So here's another story. Data on domestic violence, for example. I mean, I'm always really interested in questions of violence against women and girls. And there was, in Lagos, a woman who was doing a survey asking women about their experience of violence. And I wanted to look at the forms that she was using. And one of the questions included the expression intimate partner violence. And I said to her, I don't even think the people you're asking know what this even means. That the language that we use matters. If instead you said, do your husband's people say anything to you when he beats you? That way you're likely to get better information. Here's a story that a friend of mine who works in corporate Nigeria told me. She works in human resources, and one of her responsibilities is to organize every year a seminar during International Women's Day. And she would often ask the directors of the company to sort of nominate who should come and speak, and she would give them options. Right? Do you want somebody to come speak about small businesses? Do you want someone to come speak about domestic violence? Do you want someone to come speak about how to bake a cake? And she said that overwhelmingly the women chose domestic violence. And she thought this was telling. But these are also women who she would never have imagined experience domestic violence. So I think the question is to start to find ways to remove the shame that hangs like a shadow over the subject of male violence against women, especially among women who we traditionally do not expect to tolerate abuse. I think economics as an explanation is true, but it is not the complete story. Culture plays a role. There is the shame of a failed marriage, which is something often women bear much more than men, and also the effects of female socialization, which teaches women that their ability to love is a measure of their ability to sacrifice themselves, sacrifice their own needs, and always put other people first. Another pontificating point: do not think of the word quota as a bad word. Men have had quotas for thousands of years, and we called those quotas culture. I have never understood the argument that you should right a deep historical wrong in a way that is completely lacking in any contradiction. Throughout human history, men in all cultures all over the world excluded women from real positions of power. When only men could vote, when only men could run for political office, when only men could own property, and that's a quota. Now, in trying to undo this injustice, quotas for women are perfectly reasonable. But while I support quotas, I do think we should think about the nuances of quotas. There's nothing worse than feeling that you're a token in a workplace, or that you're not qualified, or that your colleagues think you were hired just because you're a woman. And so I think the language of quotas should always emphasize qualification. For centuries, men who were just good enough, not great or exceptional, just good enough, were hired in positions of power. In fact, many of them are leading countries today. Some not even really good enough. And so when we talk about quotas, perhaps the language should be about women who are just good enough. Another pontificating bit, think of culture as a tool of leadership. And here's a small story. So a number of years ago, the Nigerian government passed a law that criminalized homosexuality and also criminalized talking about it, and supporting it, whatever that means. And so I wrote a story, and I had a friend, well, an acquaintance, who supported this law, who went on and on about how it wasn't African culture. And so I'd written a story about a gay character. And this friend of mine, sorry, not friend, acquaintance, it's true, it's really not a friend, read my story. And in this story, the character was gay, but the character's sexual orientation was really not the main thrust of the story. And after this person read the story, he said to me, rather sadly, he said, by the time I realized the character was gay, I already liked him. It's one of the most hopeful things that anyone has ever told me about my work. It reaffirmed my faith in the power of stories. Because of a story, this acquaintance saw the humanity of a person whose human rights he had earlier been in support of squashing. Now, it is important to add that this character was not portrayed as very good or noble or very bad. This character was just ordinary and human, going through ordinary, normal human problems. He didn't have money to pay his rent. I think that storytelling can change perception. Songs, films, but most of all, the very best kind, books of imaginative writing. Another pontificating bit, keep in mind always about how women are perceived. The same traits that are praised in men are considered often repulsive in women. And these are traits that often help men succeed. So for the same behavior, a man is described as strong or determined, while a woman is called pushy or confrontational or aggressive, often resulting in negative consequences for her. I remember once talking to a woman in a position of power, and she said that the people who worked for her were often asked, what is she really like? What is she really like? As though somehow a woman in a position of power who seemed competent and mentally okay was maybe hiding some deep, dark secret. And another anecdote was, I was speaking to somebody who used to work for a woman who was powerful in Nigeria. The woman was powerful in the corporate world. And so this person then says to me, she used to appear, very nice in public, but, then she would get very angry with us when we did something wrong, and she would shout. And I was supposed to then say that this woman was evil, but what I said to this person was, actually, you've just proved that she's a full human being, wonderfully capable of a full range of human emotions. And so I think it's really important in thinking about the judgments that women receive, that we think of how often it is not so much about the behavior itself, but that the behavior is by a woman. Another pontificating point to remember, women, and this in particular I think is magnified when a woman is not white, are often not accorded an essential aspect, I think, which is the presumption of competence. Women have to make an effort to prove themselves, and in doing so, they are often then seen as not inspirational or not likable. Women who establish a reputation for competence often take extra precautions to avoid mistakes, and they're more likely to adopt a kind of defensive, maybe even rigid posture, and rely less on their imagination or their creativity. And this, of course, undermines their charisma. They're terrified of coming across as insubstantial because they know that they're already starting off being assumed to be insubstantial. And I think it then means that the perception that they get is one of lacking charisma, not being inspirational, which is actually not necessarily true. I remember reading about exit polling when Hillary Clinton ran for president, and she was, on the one hand, said to be by the 90% of the people who were polled said that she was the most competent because she was renowned for her hard work and her attention to policy details, but they also said that she was the least inspirational and the least likable. And apparently a large number of them said they wanted a leader who was likable. Another pontificating point, do not expect women to be better. The danger of this kind of thinking that somehow women, just by being women, are better than men or will make better leaders, is that if women are seen as somehow better, somehow special, somehow closer to being angels, somehow morally better, then there is a level of autonomy that women can never really have, because we cannot be fully free until we're also free to fail. And so while I don't think that women will automatically make better leaders, anecdotally, it seems that they kind of are. And we can look at the countries that were governed by women during the COVID pandemic. I mean, there was a difference in the countries that were governed by women, and maybe it was the women, maybe it was something in the water that they drank, but I'm just saying. I do think, though, that it's not that there's an inherent sort of moral goodness in women that men lack. I think it's that probably women are socialized in a different way. And I think the way that women are socialized just naturally makes for better leadership. The idea, for example, that women are more likely to believe in the idea of a consensus, less likely to reach for violence as first option, and have less of an ego or know when to put their ego aside. I, for example, have a very healthy ego, but I do know when to put it aside to achieve what I consider to be a greater good. And the question I often find myself asking is, does a person like Vladimir Putin know when to put his ego aside? Another pontificating point, and this is something that I have experienced quite a bit, is to always keep in mind that there's a greater possibility of women in positions of power experiencing a kind of casual disrespect from both women and men. I remember once talking about, like I said, something I feel very strongly about, male violence against women and girls. And it was in London with a number of women who were all active in work that was about women. And so this woman then, when I was done talking about violence against women, she said to me, "You're so passionate about this." And I thought she was saying this with approval until she said the next thing, which is, "You're scary." And I just thought, scary, really? Because I'm passionate about a subject. And I thought about it for quite a bit. Why am I scary? Would a man speaking passionately about, for example, how important it is for men to get their prostate cancer screenings be considered scary? Another pontificating point, always bring nuance to how you mentor girls and young women. It's important to know that young girls today are not okay. There's so many of us that need Actually, I think if I had a choice, I would give everyone free therapy, particularly Nigerian men. I'm sure there's some representatives of that esteemed cult. There's an epidemic of girls struggling and sinking, depression, anxiety. I mean, I feel that every day I'm reading a new study that shows how girls are just not doing well, most of it linked to social media use. And so sometimes it feels to me that the feminist slogans that we use can make things seem worse, or maybe make them feel burdened. You know, like you can do anything, reach for the sky, girls rule. I just feel that as we use these empowering slogans, we should also temper them with complexity and with nuance. When we tell girls, you know, reach for the sky, we also maybe should tell them that sometimes the wall cuts you down when you do reach for the sky. And maybe also tell them that reaching for the sky can mean different things for different people. Another pontificating point, remember that justice is always a multifaceted enterprise. It was the courage and sacrifice of Black Americans that ended overt state discrimination, but white Americans helped. It is the courage and sacrifice of women that has brought about the relative progress we have, but men need to come on board. So there's this study that I love to talk about that from bookshops about who reads what. And this was in the UK, but I think it's also true in the US, that women read books by men and women, and men read books by men. I don't know if there's any man here who wants to dispute that with statistics. Which other woman have you read, though? So, actually, you know, I've often heard from men who have said to me, "You're the only woman I read," and they expect me to be happy about it. You know, I then want to sort of whip out a list of all the women they should read. I mean, the point is, we know that men read men, which often means also that men take men more seriously. Men listen to men. In general, of course, we're generalizing, but we should. And so I think we should expect men, invite men to join in this journey of justice. You know, when women start NGOs to help women and girls who have been raped by men, men should also start NGOs to teach boys and men not to rape. I once praised a Nigerian comedian, a man, and I told him that a lot of Nigerian comedy is lazily misogynistic, where the punchline is always some sort of lazy mockery of women. And so I told him it was very refreshing to listen to him because his comedy wasn't about that. And his reply to me was, "I hope you never see any of my earlier skits because I said some really stupid things about women." And I found that very moving. And I said to him, you know, we're not looking for perfection, we're looking for progress. You know, nobody's perfect. One of the most magnificent gifts I think we have as humans is the ability to remake ourselves, to unlearn the malignant things we have learned, to improve, to take one small step after another towards the journey of progress. And so because we know that men generally listen to men, and we want to create a world where men listen to men and women, and while we do that, and until we get there, can we ask the good men to please speak up, to take a stand, to act? A few years ago, there's a bill that failed in the Nigerian Senate, and it was a bill that was about quotas for women. I think it was sort of a 35% female representation, and it failed. And I was struck by a quote in the Nigerian Guardian about it, which said, "The male legislators could not be convinced of the relevance And, and so I found myself thinking, well, I suppose we need to find men who can be convinced of the relevance of female participation. So we know that there's no country in the world today that has achieved equality for men and women. But equality is also a word whose meaning we have to parse. What do we mean by equality? I have learned from experience that treating people who are not equal as though they are equal is not the way to achieve equality. We must first make them equal, which is to say that the answer to equality is not to treat men and women exactly the same way, because obviously men and women are not the same. And it is in fact the differences between men and women that are the basis of sexism. When I look at the world today, sometimes I don't want to read the news because there's so much that's unbearable. I find myself thinking of this expression that I love, and it is in one of the most beautiful languages in the world, Igbo. And the expression is Ife Marokolo. And the literal translation is things are not standing well. And I kind of love the skewed elegance of this literal translation. But in general, it means that things are not as they should be. So I think in the world today, Ife Marokolo. And if we want things to start to stand a bit better, we need to include women in real leadership, real power. I want to end by saying, and I was thinking about ending by saying this because a relative of mine told me that some people in Nigeria who are not the most pleasant people said, Chimamanda is always talking about women, she wants to be a man. And so I want to end by saying that I am very happy being a woman. And if we, Igbo traditional religion believes in reincarnation. If we do reincarnate, it would be nice to have a choice, to be asked what you want to come back as. And so if that were to happen, I would choose to come back as a black woman with, I would still have the same chocolate-colored skin. I would still have the same kinky hair, both of which I love. But maybe the only thing is I would make myself a bit taller. Just a bit. Thank you for listening.
So thank you so very much. I am sure nobody here wants to hear anything that I have to say. You all are just itching to ask your questions, and that's exactly what we're going to do. But before that, I just get to have a whole lot of questions, but maybe just one. And then we'll go to Q&A. So, Chimamanda, storytelling is a powerful tool for influencing people and inspiring change. And you've often emphasized the importance of diverse narratives and voices. How can leaders harness the power of diverse storytelling to foster understanding and drive positive change? Typically, storytelling and all that surrounds it is not considered a tool of diplomacy, right? It's considered low politics, soft issues, right? So we wouldn't look to storytelling and authentic leadership, right? In looking to find solutions, for example, for the conflict, the Russia's war in Ukraine, right? Or the conflict in the Middle East, or militarization, the coups in Africa, or some of these other complex issues around the world, right? Is that a missed opportunity? Like, how valuable could storytelling be in policy making, policy development, advocacy, and how can we harness the power in storytelling for positive change?
I think by telling stories. Actually, the question has been answered. Is she gone? Oh, yeah. No, when she talked about the South African, they were trying to get people to stop smoking, and they had this sort of, but instead, what really worked, and that was storytelling. You're advertising and you're framing it in a very human way. I think the power that storytelling has is that it touches the thing in us that is human. It reaches. Stepping away from abstraction, I think, is really important if you want to reach people. And storytelling is the best way. I think that there are many people who, just to use the example of Israel and Palestine, who don't understand it. But by hearing the stories, we'll start to see, and I think it then helps you to make better decisions. It helps you to make more informed decisions. Thinking about the coup in Niger, for example, I think it helps to know, and not just the coup, but the excitement that people had during the coup, but also the resistance that many Nigerians, especially in the north, had to the idea of the Nigerian army going into Niger. It helps, I think, if we start to tell stories about the cultural connections between the people of Niger and the people of northern Nigeria, for example, which actually, until I started to hear the stories, I did not even know. So it made it so much easier for me to understand that for many of these people, that border, that line that was drawn is meaningless. Because culturally they're connected, they intermarry, they're often slightly different takes on the traditional marriage when it's in Niger and when it's in Nigeria. But that kind of nuance helps you to start to understand. And if you're making a decision about, for example, invading a country, and you know that these connections exist, then you kind of know that you're not going to have support from the people in northern Nigeria. So I really do think that storytelling is important. I'm not a fan of abstraction. I guess that's obvious, seeing as I write novels and I write fiction. But I just think that storytelling reaches the thing in us that is universal, human. We can reach one another by storytelling.
Thank you. And so we're going to take questions. We have the mic, running the mic. Who has the mic? Yes.
Testing.
Hi, thank you so much for today's presentation and all the presenters. My name is Linda Foinding, and I wanted to address something that everyone mentioned today, which is about changing the narrative and the story. And I figured changing the narrative should start with the vocabulary that we use, right? So for example, we talk about African countries being young and having their independence, but at the same time holding the longest history in the world, right? So what steps can we take to change the nomenclature that reflects our actual realities? For example, developed countries versus developing countries, third world, first world, second world, Western versus non-Western. This vocabulary were things that affected me growing up in Cameroon, learning that I'm from a third world country when my reality was not necessarily third world, developing and underdeveloped. Every single country in the world is developing. No country is stagnant. So why is it that certain countries are developed and others are third world, underdeveloped? And what steps can we take to really change that narrative and, take it back? Thank you.
Right, absolutely. So, Nagas, do you want to? Yes. Well, yes, I will perhaps start that conversation. As we know, there are in policymaking, nomenclature does matter, right? Stories do matter because they shape policymaking, they shape access to resources. But we also need to accept the fact that there are realities on the ground, right? So there are measures that have been established. And now, while we don't accept some of these nomenclatures, for example, the idea of third world and first world, that has changed, right? Now it's majority world and minority world, while the West is minority world and the South is majority world, because that actually houses the greatest percentage of the population, of the global population, right? So you're absolutely right. For example, the idea of sub-Saharan Africa, right? That is changing. But we also need to be alive to the reality that in arguing for a change for some of these concepts, we might miss the opportunities, right, of harnessing the power of data for policymaking. So if we say all the countries are developing, right, where do we begin to calibrate ODA, right? Where do we begin to measure who gives more, who receives more, right? If we say that all the countries for example, in Africa, let's just take Africa, right? We consider Nigeria, there are ways of characterizing the countries in Africa. We cannot say that all the countries in Africa are the same, right? So we have to, while we argue for rethinking the nomenclature and rethinking the stories and the narratives we tell around global governance, right? Global politics and the policy of it, we also have to accept the reality that some of these nomenclature are actually shaped by the availability of data, and that we don't want to, in the argument for a collective agreement of lexicon, we don't want to miss the opportunities of arguing for access to resources, right? If we say that the countries in Africa are all developing and the countries in the North are all developing, where do we begin to consider who gets ODA, right? I don't want to say aid, right? Who gets ODA and who does not get ODA? Who gives more and who does not give more? And let's not get into the argument of, where those aids came from in the first instance. What we're looking at is reality, what we have now. How do we retrace our steps? How do we ensure access to resources for countries that need it if we argue that all countries are the same, right? So I agree with you, but we also have to look at the reality of what the data says in making some of these decisions.
So I have a question for you. What language would you use instead? So in terms, you use the example developing countries.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any idea of what you think might be?
I think it's not that the issue, I think my issue is that certain countries are considered completely and fulfilled and they're developed, and others are still developing, right? And the truth is, we are all developing. But I understand your point when you're saying if we stop distinguishing that, then the countries who do need aid, that are still at, you know, the rural level will not necessarily get that. I'm not sure that I have the nomenclature right now, and I believe it's something that everybody needs to think about, but I believe just the concept of feeling inferior because of that nomenclature and growing up in that sense, I think that is what affects a lot of people, and others feeling superior because of that nomenclature. And now when you put them together in a room, then you have that dynamic where they grew up feeling superior and you grew up feeling inferior. So I think that's where I'm coming from with that.
No, I understand that. I mean, I have to tell you that, so really what we're really talking about is dignity and condescension. Right? I have to tell you about many years ago, I was giving this prize, a literary prize, small prize in Denmark, but the prize was for writers from warm countries. But here's the thing. So it was me, it was a writer from Nepal, a writer from there's somewhere else that is decidedly not warm. So it was, you know, these people, I guess, were so worried about maybe saying writers from developing countries that I think they went to the other extreme of just something, you know, something absurd. You know, I got an award for being a writer from a warm country. So I hear you, but I think as we are all thinking about, we should also really resist being patronizing, right? That there is also, I think we should also start with the assumption that those of us who come from countries that have often been called developing or third world, you know, we're also resilient people. Where I don't want us to be condescended or patronized, you know, or I don't think that I would even like it if somebody said, oh, let's all call all countries developed, or let's call all countries developing, because it's a lie. There are differences, you know. And I think that if we did that, we also, in some ways, to what Chido was saying, not just about who gets aid, who should contribute more, but also it seems to me that then we're negating history, because I think the history of exploitation kind of becomes right. We almost erase it if we don't really focus on the differences. I mean, sometimes I walk the streets of London and I'm pointing at buildings and thinking, okay, what they stole from Nigeria, they used for this one. What they stole from India, they used in this one. What they stole from Kenya. You know, the point is that there is a history of exploitation, which in many ways, I think, the story of it explains why the world is the way it is today, right? I mean, look at what's happening in the Middle East. We go back, and really, Europe is bloody responsible. But, yeah, okay, I'll stop.
We'll take more questions. Yes, Elizabeth.
Great. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I'm a former SAIS PhD. In 2009, your talk on stories really catalyzed me into thinking and owning my own. So a personal thank you tonight for what you have done. My question is because now I work at the intersection of the private sector, international development, and gender. And so often, and I think it's resonated with this room tonight, so often I find myself in rooms where the stories of the women that are being impacted by the work that I'm doing are not in the room, or they're not validated. And this is especially challenging when those stories need to be informing the policy and the operations and the things that we do, and they're not there. And so as a storyteller, as a West African woman, as an activist, a feminist, what are the ways in which you use your platform to create the space for those diverse stories? How do we do it in our little corners? What tools do you have for us in creating the space for those types of stories? Especially so that when women do take the platform of leadership rather than sort of having to swim up against a dominant paradigm. They are greeted with this swell of familiar narratives and familiar stories.
Would you mind very much if I asked for more specifics about the work that you do? I'm just trying to understand what stories are not given space. Yeah.
Sure. So I think I often find that, especially in international development, while we're creating strategies, while we're creating operations and policies, it's not rural women who are writing those policies. And the language, I think, to the conversation we were having before, I grew up in rural West Africa, in Ghana, and the conversations that I have with my aunties about firewood and the impact of climate change are not the sorts of conversations that I'm having at the upper echelons of policy and strategy making. And that discord, it stands with me. It's becoming more and more of an irritation under my belt of how to bridge that gap, of how to be a bridge builder myself, but also how do I pull those stories into the room? Is it my job to amplify? Is it my job to have moral courage? There we go.
Yes, it's your job. Yes. I mean, I think it's unfortunate. We need to, it's your job to speak for those women. It's your job to risk being unlikable or pushing the story. It's your job to insist. It's your job to point out, right? It's your job. Because if you don't do it, nobody else will. This is the thing about, when we complain about the hypocrisy of the people from cold countries, and the hypocrisy of policies, I often sit back and think, we all have our interests and our agendas. So there's a sense in which unless we do the work, nobody's going to do the work for us. Rural women in Ghana, in Cameroon, in Nigeria, they matter. The people who have access to them, who know them, the people for whom they are full human beings, are the people who have to speak for them and push their stories forward. So yes, it's your job. So go do it.
We'll take a question. Okay, so Kosi.
Hello. My name is Onyebuchi Kosi-Obuli. I'm one of the esteemed members of the Nigerian men community. So, hello, thank you. Thank you so much for coming here and speaking to us, and thank you all for the guests as well too for giving us and offering us an opportunity to learn about a lot of things and just expose ourselves to the narratives that are important here. My question is really around the importance of technology, and especially in terms of changing the narratives and unlearning. What opportunities or risks do you see of technology changing how we tell stories and how we connect with one another?
I think people should get off TikTok. I just want to add something to my sister from Ghana. I said risk being unlikable, and I mean that. Right? I really think that for every woman in the world, often you have to take the risk of being unlikable to get something done. But I think while that is happening, remember that there's so many for whom you will be very lovable. And you will be very loved. Not just those women in rural Cameroon and rural Ghana and rural Nigeria, but women like us who have class privilege. We're going to be grateful to you because you've done something for women. So I guess my point is remember to balance that. Sometimes I think women, because women know that they get the pushback they get and the backlash often will be harsh when they step out of line. It's also important to remember that it's not only about the backlash. There is also an army of love that, and my Nigerian brother, so that's it, get off TikTok. Yeah. And limit, if you have children, start limiting social media. No, I really, I find myself often feeling like the scold about social media, but I've just read too much and seen too much. And it's not that I'm sort of advocating a life, let's all be Luddites and not use technology, but they're just inherent problems. And I know that you're not talking only about social media, of course, but I think social media is a big part of it. And I think particularly for young people, particularly for girls, there's just, and Instagram, It's a disaster how I have young nieces who suddenly Instagram invents problems for girls. So recently, one of my nieces said to me, "Oh, auntie, I have hip dip." I'm like, "What the F is that?" So apparently, it's a new thing that some influencers on Instagram are telling people that they have something called hip dip, and here's what you need to do to get. And I said to her, "No, you're normal. Your body is fine." But the point is that takes up space in her brain and her mind that could have gone to something useful, So, I don't have anything useful to say about technology, honestly.
We'll take two more, perhaps two more questions.
Okay, you know what? Chilo, you know what? Let me answer the question. Let me make very short answers so that all the people in line will get a chance.
Okay.
I will try. I'll try. I'm not.
Okay.
I will cut down on the rambling.
Okay. Yes,
No,
sorry.
well.
Kamal, I'm sure you will appreciate this, but I'm going to allow a student to ask a question. I know you're an alum. We'll take you next.
I'm a lifelong
I
student.
know. I would like to give an opportunity to a SAIS student, and then we'll certainly go up. So I know that some of our students on SAIS Women Lead. Okay, you're next.
We need to take her question. Someone who gives money. I will keep giving more so that I stop getting those annoying envelopes from Hopkins.
Yes, so hi, my name is Sandrine Irankunda, and I'm a student here, SAIS third-year PhD student. So thank you so much for being here and sharing your wisdom and inspiring all of us. I know the theme of this event is authentic leadership, and I just wanted to ask, what does that mean to you, and how do you kind of adapt that to the different international spaces that you find yourself in?
Now I feel like I'm with my therapist. It's about reaching into my soul. I think in some ways, the women on the panel speaking about authentic leadership, I felt the words were resonant for me. I think it is about something internal. And so I was really fortunate to have lovely parents. I adored my parents, and it's still very hard for me to accept that they're gone. Right, my father died, and then months later my mother died, and I still cannot face it that my mother is gone. I can't. And the reason I say this is that was the foundation for me. And so I have often been known to say to people, I don't need your approval because I was loved, I have enough. And now I have really lovely siblings, one of whom is there, my brother, okay. I mean, sometimes he loves me, sometimes. But I think, I just feel that, and my parents were just decent, good people who, believed in basic human things. And I think that really was good for me. And because of that, I had the good fortune of growing up not thinking that I somehow needed to perform for other people. When I was a child, I was kind of known for, I guess, being stubborn. But by that, they meant my teachers who said I was stubborn. I think many Africans will understand that she's stubborn. Or often they'll say she has no respect. But it was really that I spoke my mind, and I felt that I should speak my mind, and I felt that my words should matter. I mean, I think I was also a bit annoying as a child, but it's about knowing who you are. I know who I am, and I like who I am, and I'm not going to do something that is not true to me to please people. I'm just not going to do that. And the reason I won't is that I won't be happy if I do. I won't sleep well, It's kind of like when someone says something rude to me and I respond in a way that I'm not happy, and then I spend the rest of the week thinking, why? There's a woman, and please put this on social media and the Nigerians, because I want to find her. It was at the airport, or Owerri Airport, about 6 years ago. There are two of them. One of them says, "Oh, I'm so excited to meet you. I want to take pictures." And then her friend says, I knew you would have one crazy hairstyle on your head. And I remember I was tired, but I actually smiled at her. And I'm so angry that I smiled at her. So I want to find her So my point is, at that moment, I was not my authentic self, and I didn't like it. That smile that's not what I was feeling. I really wanted to say to her, shut up. So I think, we have to, I think in general, for us, for women and girls, we have to be willing to show our authentic selves. We're the ones who are more likely to hide that self behind layers. And it's understandable, because for us, there are consequences in a way that men don't face. But we should be willing to, because I think in the end, we're better off. Be who you are. Young people like to say things like, speak your truth. And I've started to quibble with that expression, because now it starts to seem as though there is no objective truth. Each of us has our truth. I mean, we can, but really, I hope I'm making sense, which is, I said I'll keep it short, which is really, that's what authentic leadership is to me. I want to be true to myself. I want to keep trying to be true to myself. And if it helps other people, it makes me happy. If it annoys other people, that's their problem.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Kamal, and I'm a lifelong student. I'll try to be succinct. So I saw from your biography on Wikipedia that you have a daughter in the U.S. That's what Wikipedia said to me. So my question is coming from, as a parent, do you find any conflict in your definition of feminism, especially from a cultural lens, raising a child in the U.S.? And one of the reasons why I'm asking this, especially a daughter in the U.S., according to Wikipedia, and the reason why I'm asking this question is because I have several friends from Africa, from various countries in Africa. And one of my friends from Uganda, she's from a specific ethnic group. And when she was getting, even though she's a feminist, very westernized, she's lived in the U.S. for many years. When she was marrying someone outside of her ethnic group, she insisted that he actually pay a dowry, and she felt that it was compatible with her feminism. So that's one reason why I'm asking this question about this conflict between your own cultural norms, or cultural norms broadly, and reconciling them with what global norms of feminism is about.
Okay, I'm going to argue with the premise of the question.
Okay.
And it's that you're conflating feminism and Western.
Okay.
And I really have to quarrel with that, because I don't think that's true. I often say that I didn't become a feminist because I read feminist books by Westerners. I became a feminist because I just watched my world growing up in small town in Soka in southeastern Nigeria. And I also think that I'm a feminist because my family believes that my great-grandmother come back. My great-grandmother was the fiercest woman in my hometown. She challenged men. She was known as headstrong and a troublemaker. She was a feminist. If you look at Nigerian history, the feminists, about women, when they rose up and said, no, you're not going to tax us, the British government, they were feminists. So I really think it's important for us not to, Western feminism is the most, I suppose, documented feminism, and therefore the most familiar feminism, but it is not the only feminism. And I don't, and I think there's actually a lot about African indigenous cultures that are feminist. Actually, there's a lot we should hold those intrepid missionaries responsible for. Things like, because I've found myself going back, I'm really interested in pre-colonial African cultures, and it's fascinating to me the powers that women had. This really wonderful thing about sitting on a man. So in Igbo culture, a man, beats his wife or something. His wife tells the community of women, you know what they do? They all gather and sit on him. I just love that. I think we should bring that back. But no, I don't feel any contradictions. I'm raising my daughter. My husband and I are raising our daughter. And none at all. We're raising her. She knows that she is Nigerian. She also, switches easily to her American self. And we're raising her with very feminist ideas. And what are feminist ideas? Just really about justice, about saying that you shouldn't, just because a person is a female person, that person should not be held back. Really, that's what it is. That person deserves full dignity. So no, not at all. Not at all. I don't feel any kind of, and I own that as an Igbo feminism, a Nigerian feminism, an African feminism. I do not think, and the question of dowry, I know I said I'll keep it short, but even that we can talk about, right? Because, and you say that, pay dowry as opposed to Western global. But I mean, this is also a culture, this Western global culture, in which men are expected to buy very expensive rings. And I don't know if you would ask a Western global woman whether her feminism is in conflict with expecting an engagement ring. I mean, I quite frankly, I really do find, I find the idea of expensive engagement rings to be quite ridiculous. But, dowries make a bit more sense to me. And you have to also remember that we also have to remember that dowries were not, the real meaning of dowries, and it really was about family. It's really not that you're buying a woman, or that, no, when you say dowry, so is it what the woman's family pays? Bride price. The husband, yeah. It's really not supposed to be, I'm buying a woman. I mean, I don't like, I want to be very clear, I think the idea of a bride price, I'm not a fan of it. However, my father, who, was a professor, who read every kind of book in the world, was also an Igbo man, and he had a lot of respect for his culture. And so because of my father, I let the bride price happen for me. But my father made it, he didn't want money. He wanted it to be symbolic. So in that way, you kind of can make changes, but still be true to the spirit of your culture. And I don't think that is anti-feminist. That we also give gifts to the groom's family. Not money. So no, you better leave that friend of yours alone. Stop bothering her about dowry. Okay.
Well, so I have my marching orders, from my team, and I understand that we have come to the end of this very session, but we have another session. We have the reception, and our guests are available for the reception. We are going to continue having the conversation. But this time we'll be having a conversation with food and the nectar of the gods were available. And we have, again, a musical performance, and we have the lovely Emi Mahmood with us, who will be reading poetry, the spoken word. And we have our mentors and networking all set up on the 8th floor. And so once we close, please follow the ushers out to the lobby, and they'll usher you all up to the 8th floor. And we'll meet you there. Thank you very much.